The morning light filtered through the tree leaves, dancing on the porch table where Emily and Lydia were having tea. Emily stirred the liquid in her cup gently, her red hair tied in a loose bun, green eyes shining as she talked about the idea of turning her own illustrations into a real gallery. Lydia, with grey hair and deep brown eyes, maintained a restrained smile, listening to every detail as if they were notes of a symphony. The soft aroma of mint rose in the air as they dreamed together, and Emily got excited as she showed a sketch of a logo with the gallery's name. "It will be a welcoming space, Mom, with large canvases, natural light, and people feeling peace just by entering," said Emily, smiling sweetly. Lydia placed her hand on her daughter's and replied, "If anyone can create such a place, it's you." On the other side of town, Peter rummaged through the living room drawers impatiently. His face was rigid, jaw clenched, and blue eyes full of frustration. The black-haired man always knew how to point out flaws, but never how to recognize merits. He searched for his wallet as if someone had purposely hidden it, and muttered phrases only he understood. Instead of calling his wife, he dialed his father's number and huffed loudly as soon as he heard the voice on the other end. "She lost my wallet again, Dad. Everything this house has in beauty, it has in disorganization," said Peter, pacing back and forth. Harold took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Emily is dedicated, Peter. Maybe she just put it in the wrong place. Have you thought about asking nicely?" Peter laughed ironically and retorted, "She lives with her head in the clouds. It's like living with an adult child." On the porch, the wind blew softly, swaying Lydia's grey hair as she collected the cups. Emily stood up and gave her mother a long hug, resting her face on her shoulder as she did in childhood. Lydia held her daughter's hand for a few seconds and commented affectionately, "You have that glow on your face, like when you were about to receive a gift." Emily chuckled softly and, staring at the clear sky, said unhurriedly, "Today I feel light, Mum, as if I'm closing a cycle." Lydia tried to smile, but that strange comment kept reverberating in her mind, even as she walked to the car. Emily, distracted with the papers she left on the porch, didn't even notice she had forgotten her cell phone on the armrest of the chair. Before we begin, comment where you're watching this story from and subscribe to the channel to keep following. Peter hung up the phone and finally found the wallet in one of the pockets of his jacket, hanging on the back of the sofa. He grumbled to himself and sat down in front of the television, opening his wife's computer that was on the coffee table. He browsed through the folders and sighed, seeing hundreds of files with names of exhibitions, images of paintings, and messages exchanged with clients. He glanced over without interest and closed the lid forcefully. "So much effort for nothing. Art gallery doesn't fill the fridge," he muttered, as if each phrase was more bitter than the last. From the adjacent room, the clock marked the end of the morning, and he still hadn't asked where Emily was. Lydia arrived home and went straight to the phone, trying to call her daughter. It rang until it went to voicemail. She tried again. Then she sent a voice message, but nothing indicated it would be heard. She sat on the sofa with the blouse Emily had left there on a recent visit and ran her fingers over the embroidery on the collar. "You've always been distracted, my girl, but today something in me urges me to insist," she murmured, looking at the motionless phone. She called once more and left the device on her lap, waiting with her eyes fixed on the wall, as if that would bring some answer. In the early evening, Peter was sitting in the living room, watching some program with the sound louder than necessary. The intercom rang and he, irritated, got up slowly. When he answered, he heard the direct voice of a police officer asking him to come down. He went down grumbling, concerned about what might have happened in the building. As he opened the lobby door, 2 officers were there, serious, and one of them took off his hat respectfully. "Are you Mr. Peter, husband of Mrs. Emily?" asked the officer. Peter confirmed with a nod. "We regret to inform you that your wife suffered a serious accident this afternoon. She didn't survive." Peter blinked a few times, not immediately understanding. He brought his hand to his chin and with disconcerting coldness murmured, "But what about the house documents? What happens to them now?" At the same time, in another part of town, Lydia was still sitting with the phone in her lap when she heard the doorbell ring. She got up quickly and went to the door. Upon opening the door, she saw a police officer with a downcast face. "Are you Emily's mother?" asked the man, holding a cap between his hands. Lydia froze inside and nodded, feeling her legs weaken. "I'm sorry. She was involved in a traffic accident this afternoon. She didn't survive her injuries," said the officer. Lydia brought her hands to her mouth, staggering backward, being gently supported by him. "This can't be happening. My daughter, my Emily," she said between sobs, falling to her knees, hugging the forgotten blouse as if it still held her daughter's scent. Peter returned to the apartment and threw himself on the sofa with a furrowed brow. He called his father, Harold, and delivered the news in a distant tone. "Emily is gone, Dad. The police were just here," he said, as if talking about closing a bank account. Harold remained silent for a few seconds and then responded, "This is very serious, Peter. You need to respect what happened. She was your wife." Peter sighed and retorted, "Yes, she was. Now I need to see what to do with her name on the house records. Everything is in her name." Harold hung up in silence, with watery eyes, looking at a frame with a photo of Emily smiling at a past dinner. As dawn fell over the city, Lydia remained seated on the floor with the blouse in her hands. The silence of the house was only interrupted by her own sighs, which came like waves. At one point, she looked at Emily's photograph on the shelf, an image of her daughter at 7 years old, with paint on her face and holding a brush. "You had so much to do, my girl. So much beauty inside you," she said quietly. And as acute as the pain was, there was a silent conviction within her. Something was wrong with that fate, and she would find out what it was. In Peter's house, silence also took over, but the atmosphere was different. He walked among the rooms, making notes in a notebook and opening drawers. When he found a blue folder with Emily's name on the cover, he opened it and began examining the papers. "I need to understand what I can or cannot touch," he said to himself, with a cold and calculating look. On the porch, the chair where Emily used to sit swayed slightly in the wind, as if her presence still lingered there. But Peter didn't notice. He was too busy thinking about how to reorganize their assets. And while two houses experienced such different mourning, something was born in two hearts that would change the course of history. In Lydia, the seed of truth that needed to be unearthed. And in Peter, the rush to claim a space he never earned by merit. Lydia knew that the cycle of lightness her daughter mentioned wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much greater. "You tried to tell me, Emily. I will understand what it was," she thought, looking into the dark night like someone who heard in the silence the last message that still needed to be revealed. The scent of flowers filled the air, mixing with the muffled sound of conversations in the main hall. Emily's house was full of familiar faces and soft voices, all there to offer support, even though the atmosphere was silently tense. Lydia entered through the front door accompanied by Harold. She held a small arrangement in her hands, her eyes tired but attentive to every detail. Harold, quiet, observed the environment with sobriety. Peter wasn't around. One of the neighbors commented with some discomfort that he had left early and hadn't said where he was going. Lydia looked around, took a deep breath and murmured, "He can't even respect the house where she lived." Harold responded in a low tone, almost as a warning. "Or perhaps he's taking care of something he shouldn't." Upstairs, the door to Emily's room remained closed. Most people gathered in the living room, where photos of the young woman were arranged on a table. Lydia approached one of them and ran her fingers over the frame. It was an image of Emily painting outdoors, with her hair in the wind. A feeling of indignation grew in her chest. "She deserves more than this," she said softly, holding back tears. Harold placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Let's keep our eyes open. Peter is not predictable." At that moment, a house employee approached discreetly and, with a confessional air, commented that Peter had mistreated Emily numerous times. Lydia held the woman's hand and spoke without hesitation. She was too much light for him. Shortly after, the door opened. Peter entered through the garage with determined steps and a dark folder under his arm. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt and had an impassive face. Harold watched him from a distance, attentive to every movement. Peter went straight through the room without greeting anyone and climbed the stairs as if fleeing from something. Lydia, silent, followed him with her eyes until he disappeared upstairs. Harold, already restless, whispered firmly, "He's hiding something. That folder isn't from the bank." Lydia frowned and responded with contained anger. "He thinks he can do this under our noses. But I'm going to end this today. Minutes later, Harold discreetly went upstairs to retrieve a memento from his daughter's room. While walking down the hallway, he saw Peter entering the office with that folder. Pretending not to notice, he continued walking, but heard the sound of a drawer being hastily opened. The door was ajar. Harold paused for a moment and through the gap saw Peter taking papers from the folder and placing them in a document box. He put everything away quickly and locked it with a key. Harold went downstairs without saying anything, but with an even more serious expression. Upon rejoining Lydia, he whispered in her ear, "He's hiding papers, the same ones that were in the folder. He's afraid something might leak." Lydia didn't hesitate. "Well, today I'm ending this charade." That same afternoon, the activity diminished. People were dispersing. The hall was now calmer, with only a few close family members remaining. Peter reappeared wearing a different shirt and sat down in the office. Lydia seized the opportunity. She entered the room and approached him firmly. Peter pretended to be reading something, but her tone of voice cut through the air. "You think you can manipulate everything after her death, but you're wrong. Today, at the wake, I'm going to end this charade. Emily knew everything." Peter slowly put down the papers and turned around. His eyes were fixed on her. His clenched jaw revealed his tension. "You're being dramatic, Lydia." "You're upset and I understand," he said, trying to sound calm. Lydia looked at him with contempt. "Don't try to calm me down. Not even today do you respect her memory." Peter stood up and left the room without responding. Lydia remained there for a few seconds, catching her breath, before heading to the bathroom in the hallway. She placed her purse on the counter and entered the room with firm steps. Inside, she washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. She was determined. In that envelope she carried was Emily's written will, a document that could change everything. While she composed herself outside, Peter approached silently. His eyes were fixed on the purse left in the hall. He looked around, making sure no one was watching him. The hall was now practically empty. He took a deep breath and held the purse with trembling hands. "If she threatened me, it's because she has something here," he thought. With quick fingers, he unzipped it and searched through the contents. He found the envelope with Emily's name handwritten on it. Seeing what was inside, his eyes widened. It was a will. He quickly read the first line and saw there was no mention of him as a beneficiary. His heart raced. Without thinking twice, he put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked around again and saw, on a table near the door, the book where visitors wrote messages to the deceased. He tore out a blank page and folded it in the same format as the original envelope. He placed it inside the purse, closed it precisely, and put it back in the same place. "Now let's see if she's so certain about what she's carrying," he muttered. Lydia left the bathroom breathing more easily. She picked up her purse and headed to the car with Harold, who was waiting in front. Peter watched them from the upstairs window, trying to maintain a controlled expression. On the way, Lydia spoke to Harold in a low voice. "Today, when that priest finishes his speech, I'm going to go up to the podium. I'm going to read what Emily left in writing. Everyone will know who he really is." Harold nodded and replied, "If what's in that paper is what you say, then today marks the beginning of the end of his charade." Lydia held her purse tighter, not knowing what was really inside now. Inside the house, Peter paced back and forth, feeling a mixture of relief and anguish. He knew he couldn't make any more mistakes. He had already committed the biggest act of risk since Emily's death, and now everything depended on Lydia's reaction. If she tried to read the will and was discredited, he would emerge as the victim. "Let her come. Today I take control," he muttered in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie and trying to maintain a rehearsed expression. He felt that for the first time in a long time, he was ahead of the situation. The afternoon advanced and preparations for the wake were being finalized. Lydia and Harold arrived at the venue early, helping with the organization. On a table, various flowers and mementos of Emily were displayed, photographs, books, newspaper clippings. Lydia placed a small brooch from her daughter's childhood among the objects. "She used to wear this when she painted outdoors," she said with a choked voice. Harold held her hand and replied, "Today she will be heard, even if she is no longer here." Peter arrived a few minutes later, already greeting those present with restrained gestures. I avoided crossing long gazes with Lydia, but smiled discreetly at the others. The chairs aligned perfectly in the hall, illuminated by tall stained glass windows, and the aroma of white flowers filled the air with a mixture of beauty and melancholy. In the background, a sequence of photos showed Emily at different moments of her life, from childhood to adulthood, with a smile that seemed to hover above the general sadness. Lydia, wearing modest clothing with her hair tied back, walked silently to the reserved seat in the first row. Harold accompanied her closely, attentive to the smallest details, as if he could detect something hidden in the expressions of those present. Before sitting down, he held her by the shoulders and said, "If you're sure, do it." Lydia nodded slowly, with a firm gaze. "I am. Emily cannot be silenced even now." Peter was at the back of the hall, smiling in a restrained manner, wearing a dark suit that contrasted with the coldness in his eyes. He greeted everyone as if he were at a formal dinner, not at his own wife's wake. He shook hands, offered words of gratitude, and when someone cried, he merely lowered his head slightly, like someone pretending to feel something. With each step he took among the guests, he cast quick glances at Lydia's purse. She doesn't know the embarrassment she's about to face, he thought, while continuing his round of greetings. When he passed near Harold, the two stared at each other for a second too long, and Harold commented in a low tone, "Are you afraid? Because you should be." The priest signaled for everyone to take their seats and walked slowly to the pulpit. In a serene tone, he began to speak about the light that Emily represented, about her artistic sensitivity and her unique way of seeing the world. As the words were spoken, Lydia kept her eyes fixed on Peter, who now sat on the other side of the room, with his face resting in his hands as if immersed in grief. Harold crossed his arms and observed with suspicion. "Fake mourning is easy to spot," he murmured. Lydia, without averting her eyes, replied, "He always knew how to lie. He just didn't know that I knew too." The speech ended with a prayer. The priest thanked everyone and asked for a moment of silence. The hall became motionless. Eyes turned to the altar where flowers and a frame with the image of Emily smiling rested. When the silence broke, it was by Lydia's voice. She stood up with a firm posture, walked to the pulpit, and turned to those present. Everyone exchanged glances, surprised by the unexpected movement. She then spoke clearly. "Emily left a will, and it was her wish that I read this here, in front of everyone." Murmurs filled the environment. Peter raised his head, tense. Lydia opened her purse and carefully took out the envelope. It's time for everyone to know what she really wanted. With all eyes on her, Lydia opened the envelope with slow movements, as if holding something sacred. She took out the folded sheet and positioned it on the pulpit. She unfolded the paper, and upon looking at it, her hands froze. The paper was completely blank. No words, no trace, no sign that there had been a will there. Just emptiness. A deafening silence invaded the hall. Lydia blinked several times, trying to understand. She looked at the sheet, then at the purse, then again at the paper. This isn't right. There was something here," she said with a broken voice. The guests murmured. Harold stood up, restless. Peter rose forcefully. "Enough!" shouted Peter, his voice echoing like thunder in the hall. "You're expelled from our house!" The gazes turned to him, confused and shocked. Lydia remained motionless, still holding the blank sheet in her hands, as if she were holding something rotten between her fingers. Peter walked to the pulpit and pointed at her with theatrical indignation. "Would you have the courage to use your own daughter's wake to create a lying spectacle? This is sick." The commotion grew. Some people tried to approach to understand. Others whispered in an obvious manner. Lydia, trembling, only said, "But there was a will. She wrote it. She signed it." Harold came up to the pulpit and wrapped his arms around Lydia's shoulders, gradually moving her away. "Let's get out of here," he said in a low, firm voice, trying to protect her from the embarrassment. Peter crossed his arms, keeping his frozen gaze on the couple as they descended from the pulpit in silence. Lydia, still in shock, held the blank sheet as if it were a weapon that had failed to fire. As they passed by the guests, the faces varied between pity and judgment. Someone murmured that the pain must have made her invent things. Another commented that it was lamentable to transform a moment of mourning into a dispute. Lydia, with a muffled voice, only whispered, "She wouldn't let me go through this. She trusted me." Outside, the cool night air touched Lydia's face but brought no relief. She sat on one of the garden benches in front of the hall, and Harold remained standing beside her. The wind moved the tree branches slowly, as if everything around conspired to keep the atmosphere in suspense. Lydia breathed with difficulty, trying to understand what had happened. "I put it in the bag myself. I folded it carefully. I saw her name. It was real," she said without looking at Harold. He leaned over and replied firmly, "I saw you store it, and I saw him watching. He switched it." "I know he did." Lydia stared at Harold with watery eyes, her expression confused between pain and indignation. "But why? Why would he do that right now?" Harold didn't hesitate. "Because he knew. You threatened. You warned that you would read it. He had time, had motive, and had access." Lydia ran her hand across her face, remembering the moment she left her bag in the hall, the time she spent in the bathroom, the time Peter was alone before the wake. Everything was starting to fit together in a bitter way. "He must have taken the will and put something else in its place," she murmured. Harold nodded. "And what he put was nothing. Because that's what he wanted everyone to believe, that there was nothing." The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. It was Peter, coming toward the exit, still with a tense expression. As he passed Lydia and Harold, he didn't say a word. He just glanced with an almost imperceptible smile as if he had won. Lydia watched him pass with her heart in flames. He thought he erased the truth, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with, she thought. Harold squeezed her shoulder and added, "We're going to find out how, and we're going to prove it. What he did today will have consequences." Lydia took a deep breath. The night was just beginning, and the truth was still alive somewhere. Emily had trusted her, and she wouldn't let that be in vain. Arriving home, Peter locked the front door with a slow movement, leaving behind the cutting silence that had hung since the previous night. Upon entering the house, he took off his jacket and threw it on the back of the sofa, going directly to the fireplace. The room was dark, illuminated only by the low flames that still resisted among the embers. In his hands, the original envelope with Emily's name trembled slightly. He removed the true document, looked at the deceased's signature for a second, and with a decisive gesture, threw the paper into the fire. The flames licked the paper as if they knew the value it carried. "It's over. No one will know anything anymore," he murmured, sitting in front of the fire with a satisfied smile. "She wanted to destroy me, but now not even her memory can get in my way." On the other side of the city, Lydia's house remained silent, but filled with restlessness. She and Harold were sitting side by side on the small living room sofa, still dressed in the clothes from the night before. Lydia's hands were interlaced, and her eyes fixed on a random point on the wall, as if reliving the moment of humiliation repeatedly. Harold, observing his friend's state, broke the silence carefully. "Lydia, did Emily use her personal computer a lot?" The question pulled her out of her stupor. She took a few seconds to respond, but nodded firmly. "Yes, she did. She wrote everything there. She said she liked to keep her ideas in secret folders." Harold stood up calmly. "Then perhaps the truth is still stored somewhere." They walked to Emily's room, which Lydia had preserved exactly as her daughter had left it. The air there had a soft lavender scent, and each object seemed to contain a fragment of her presence. The notebook rested on the desk, covered by a small embroidered towel. Lydia took a deep breath before picking it up, as if that simple gesture brought back all the years of living together. Harold took the device carefully, brought it to the living room table, and turned it on. The screen lit up slowly, revealing the wallpaper with a painting by Emily in blue tones. Lydia placed her hand on her chest and murmured, "She's still here. She left something for me." Harold looked at the screen and replied, "We'll find it. We just need to be calm and attentive." With attentive eyes, Harold navigated through the computer folders. Most had simple names like projects and clients, but in the lower corner was one titled Legacy. He paused the cursor over it and looked at Lydia, who sat down beside him, distressed. Harold clicked. Inside the folder, just a single file named Final Will signed. He opened the document, and the words appeared on the screen like a whisper from beyond. It was Emily's will, digitally signed, dated the previous week. Lydia began to read in a low voice, her eyes watering. "I leave everything to my mother, Lydia, who has always been my foundation, my light, my true family." Harold squeezed her arm and said, "Here it is. Here is what he tried to erase." Lydia slid her fingers across the screen, reading each line carefully. The house, the savings, the copyrights to her works, everything was intended for her mother. The only mention of Peter appeared in the penultimate paragraph, "I leave nothing to someone who never saw me as a human being." The words pierced through Lydia like a firm blade, not from pain but from confirmation. Emily knew. Emily had become aware of everything. "She did this to protect me, even knowing I would suffer afterward," she murmured. Harold nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "She didn't want him to have anything, and now it's in our hands to prove it." They spent the next few minutes printing the document and making copies on a flash drive. Harold handled everything with precision, while Lydia, still shaken, looked for any notation indicating with whom Emily had formally registered it. They found no lawyer's name. Lydia searched through the agenda, notebooks, even the drawers in her daughter's room, but there was nothing indicating the professional's name. "She must have thought she'd have time to tell later," said Lydia, carefully sifting through papers. Harold leaned against the door and crossed his arms. Or maybe she wanted to do everything quietly, so as not to alert him. Dawn was breaking when they sat down on the sofa again, exhausted, but certain that the first step had been taken. The silence of the house was now different. It carried the weight of responsibility. Lydia held the printed copy of the will as if it were her daughter's last embrace. She knew he would react this way. She predicted everything. She just didn't imagine she would leave so soon. Harold, still with the notebook on his lap, looked at her and said firmly, "Now we need to find the lawyer. Without him, this might be worth nothing." Lydia took a deep breath, determined. "I will remember something, even if I have to relive every conversation we had in the last year." Famesti, with the document in hand, Harold suggested taking the flash drive to his technical support to make more copies and store it safely. Lydia handed over the file as if it were a treasure. While he prepared to leave, she sat in Emily's room once more. She looked at the paintings her daughter had created still hanging on the walls. She picked up a notebook and leafed through it calmly, looking for clues. Some pages were full of ideas, others with poems, and one in particular had an underlined phrase, "Talk to Gregory about digital validity." Lydia read it 3 times and repeated it quietly. Gregory. That must be his name, his. Harold returned in the early afternoon and found Lydia holding the notebook with the page marked. She showed him the notation, and he wrote the name on a piece of paper. "This is a start. Let's look for this Gregory." If she trusted him, it's because he knew what he was doing. Lydia stood up with difficulty, but her gaze was that of someone who had found direction again. "He will help us. I feel it." Emily trusted him, and I trust her. Harold put the paper in his pocket and replied, "We'll find him, even if it takes all day. But someone will have to explain how to formalize this." With the name in hand, Harold opened the computer again and began searching for records with that name linked to digital registrations or law practice. Meanwhile, Lydia returned to the legacy folder and began to examine the details of the file. Within the same folder was a second document, less detailed, like a preliminary version. In it, Emily had written a draft of what she intended to leave in the final will. It was almost identical to the signed document, but the tone was even more personal. Lydia read in silence, feeling the weight of her daughter's words. "If something happens, I want to ensure my mother is safe, and that no one manipulates what I built." Lydia closed her eyes and pressed the paper against her chest. "You will not be silenced, my daughter, I swear." The clock marked the end of the day when Harold rose from his chair with an alert expression. He had found 2 possible records with Gregory's name linked to independent legal consultancies. None of the phone numbers worked. Lydia, determined, suggested they go to the addresses the next day. "If he's still there, we'll find him. And if he's not, we'll keep looking." Harold took the notebook, the printed documents, and the flash drive. "We'll start early tomorrow. But today we've already won the first battle." Lydia looked at the sky through the window. Night was coming again, but now with a glimmer of hope. Emily had trusted, and that was all she needed to continue. The morning began with news that made Lydia rise from her chair as if she had received an electric shock. Harold came through the door with the newspaper folded in his hands, his eyes fixed on the front page. As he extended the paper, he revealed a headline surrounded by a large photo. "Widower honors wife with posthumous exhibition." The image showed Peter next to Emily's painting, smiling for the cameras, with a sign behind him that read, "Peter and Emily Collection, a creative journey." Lydia squinted to make sure of what she was reading. "He's using her name, as if it were his too," she muttered. Harold replied with contained anger, "And apparently, he's taking credit for authorship. This has gone too far." Lydia and Harold sat in front of the computer, as if every second were precious. They opened Emily's email again, searching more carefully. In the sent messages, they found one titled "Confidential Will," sent to a contact named Gregory Hart. Upon opening the content, they saw a direct text where Emily said she had finalized the legal terms with him and that, in case of urgency, everything was with him. At the top of the message, a header with a residential address caught their attention. She trusted him. "And if she sent this, it's because she left something with him," said Lydia. Harold firmly wrote down the address. "Let's go there now. If he's there, he'll tell us the truth." The house was on a secluded street, surrounded by old trees and silence. It was a modest construction, with closed wooden windows and a low gate that creaked at the slightest touch. Lydia knocked on the door twice, then 3 times. She called out the name from the email. No response. Harold walked around, checking if there was movement inside. Nothing. The house seemed empty for days. "He must have left town," said Harold. Lydia took a paper from her purse and began to write a letter in her firm handwriting, explaining who she was, what they were looking for, and the urgency in her words. She carefully folded it and attached it to the gate with a clip. "If he returns, he'll see this, and if he has a conscience, he'll contact us." Back in the city, Peter smiled before cameras, posing next to Emily's works as if they were extensions of himself. On each painting, a small metal plaque bore both their names, joined as if they were co-authors. A reporter approached and asked about the creative process. Peter, with a measured expression, answered, "Emily and I were always partners in everything." "This exhibition shows how much we built together," another reporter insisted, asking about the copyrights of the works. Peter responded with cynical naturalness. "Every registration she made went through me. Her art was our life." He concluded with a rehearsed phrase, "My mission now is to keep alive the memory of what we were." Lydia watched the interview on television, with glazed eyes and hands gripping the chair's armrest. Peter's speech made her burn inside. He's destroying what she created, turning into a lie what was pure. Harold, standing next to the bookshelf, commented, "He's trying to build a version of himself that never existed, and he'll be believed. If we do nothing." Lydia stood up decisively. "We have to prove that all this is a performance, that he erased the truth and is now shaping another. But we need that lawyer. We need Gregory." Night fell with the weight of a day without answers. Lydia sat in Emily's room, surrounded by her daughter's belongings. In her hand, she held one of the brushes used by her, as if that gesture could bring her back. On the other side of the house, Harold organized the documents and digital copies they had made. The clock marked the beginning of dawn when the phone in the living room rang. Lydia ran to answer it, her heart pounding in her throat. On the other end, a male voice, calm and firm, identified himself as Gregory. "I received the letter. I'm sorry for your loss. And yes, I was responsible for the will." Lydia pressed the phone against her face. "Do you have something from her? Do you still keep it?" Gregory responded with assurance. "If she left me something, it's kept safely." Harold approached Lydia with attentive eyes, trying to hear what was being said on the call. Lydia kept her gaze fixed on the floor while speaking. "Can you meet us? It's urgent. Something serious has happened." On the other end, Gregory explained that he was out of town, resolving personal matters. "I'll be back in 2 days. I can meet you as soon as I return. Don't worry. If she trusted me, it's because she knew what she was doing." Lydia thanked him with a choked voice. Upon hanging up, she looked at Harold and said firmly, "He exists, and he knows. We just need to wait." Harold responded without hesitation. 2 days, we can hold on for 2 days, but he better be telling the truth." The next day, Peter gave another interview, this time for a local radio station. He spoke with the tone of an exemplary widower, mentioning how Emily's art was a legacy that he now carried alone. When questioned about Lydia, he simply said, "Pain has made her lose her balance. I don't blame her." Lydia heard everything sitting in the living room, Her eyes glazed over at the wall. Harold turned off the radio angrily. "He is burying you along with your daughter." Lydia shook her head and replied, "But I'm still standing and soon with evidence in hand." The following hours were marked by silence and restlessness. Lydia reviewed every conversation she had with Emily in recent months, looking for clues about Gregory, about anything that might prepare the ground for their reunion. Harold spent the time organizing digital files, separating copies and printing new documents. At the end of the day, they sat at the table exhausted, but with hope still burning. Lydia held her daughter's notebook and said, "She knew the truth could be hidden. That's why she left more than one key. And we found the first one." Harold nodded with his eyes fixed on the paper. "The second is in Gregory's hands. When he returns, this story changes." Peter walked through the main room with a decoration catalogue in his hands, analyzing the sofa that had belonged to Emily, as if it were just any piece of furniture. He pointed to it and ordered it to be removed that very morning. In less than an hour, 2 pieces of furniture were replaced by modern versions without color or affection. The paintings that Emily had hung with such care were removed from the wall and placed in a corner, where they began to be stacked. In the kitchen, the cook watched in silence as he gave orders with disdain. "We're going to transform this into something more practical, without so much of a childish gallery look," he said, pointing to a canvas with colorful strokes. The cook looked at him with disgust and muttered, "You are burying her soul." Lydia and Harold observed everything from a distance, leaning against the other side of the street, inside the parked car. They had spent much of the morning discreetly watching the coming and going of trucks and deliverymen. It was as if Peter was hurriedly removing every trace of Emily. Lydia narrowed her eyes with each piece of furniture being taken away. That house was her soul. Everything she loved he is erasing. Harold, with his arms crossed, replied, "He wants to get rid of everything before the truth returns. He's clearing the ground for the lie to prosper." Lydia nodded, holding tightly to the copy of the will. "But he will have to return everything he took." Late in the afternoon, the cook left through the front door with a small suitcase in her hands. She walked hurriedly, without looking back. Lydia recognized her from afar and immediately got out of the car, intercepting her on the sidewalk. "Are you leaving?" she asked. The woman, visibly shaken, answered with a choked voice, "I can't stand to see what he's doing anymore. That house no longer has her presence. He erased everything, as if she had never lived there." Lydia thanked her with a silent nod. She returned to the car with more conviction. "That's it. Now it's public. We need to show this to people." Harold looked at her and added, "Let's find someone who has the courage to publish the truth." The next day, Lydia and Harold met with a known editor of a small but respected newspaper for its independence. They brought a copy of the will, images of the exhibition, and accounts of Peter's behavior after the death. The journalist listened to everything carefully, noting every detail. When Lydia showed the article from the previous newspaper, where Peter presented himself as co-author of the works, he raised his eyebrows. "This will raise questions, especially if she left a will in your favor." Lydia responded firmly, "She left everything to me, and he's pretending it doesn't exist." The editor closed the notebook and said, "We will give voice to this. Someone needs to." By the end of that same afternoon, an article was published in the digital version of the newspaper with the title, "The Other Version of Emily's Legacy." The report included excerpts from the will, images of the house being emptied, and the testimony of witnesses who saw the renovations. Lydia and Harold read the text in silence, sitting side by side on the sofa. "Now it's not just us who know," said Lydia with teary eyes. Harold kept his gaze fixed on the screen. Now he will need to explain why he is erasing the name of the one who created everything. At Peter's house, the phone rang insistently, but he ignored it. Sitting at the table in the remodeled living room, he observed the new decorative paintings, as if trying to convince himself that this was the right space. He picked up the next morning's newspaper, but found nothing about him. Only at night, when he opened the internet, did he see the headline displayed. He was silent for a few seconds, then slammed his hand hard on the table. "She's trying to destroy me even in death," he said, clenching his teeth. He walked in circles around the room. "But this changes nothing. The will doesn't exist. They can't prove it." He smiled coldly. "They're betting too high." At the end of the night, Lydia and Harold were exhausted. They sat on the porch of the house, watching the streetlights go out one by one. Lydia's phone rang, breaking the silence. She answered immediately. On the other end, Gregory's voice sounded calm but firm. "I'm back in town. I read your letter, and I believe we need to talk as soon as possible." Lydia held the device with both hands. "We have the digital will, but he destroyed the physical one. He's trying to take everything." Gregory paused before responding. "If she left me something, it's safely stored, and it can help you." Lydia took a deep breath. "Can we meet tomorrow morning?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "I'll be waiting. Give me an address." As she hung up, Lydia brought her hands to her face. Harold approached and waited for confirmation. "He's back. He's ready to see us." "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Harold placed his hand on her shoulder and spoke calmly. "Then tomorrow begins the part he won't be able to erase. Not with renovation, not with lies, not with interviews." Lydia looked at the dark sky and whispered, "If she left it in his hands, it's because she trusted him. And I'll trust him too." Harold nodded, with a steady gaze. "Tomorrow the truth will walk with us, and he'll need to run to keep lying." With the meeting set, Lydia gathered all the documents again. She put the copies of the will, the emails, the exhibition prints, and the photos of the renovated house in a folder. Harold prepared the car, reviewed the address, and adjusted everything for the following morning. Before sleeping, they sat once more in Emily's room, where her paintings were still hanging. Lydia caressed one of the frames and said, "We're getting close. Just one more step." Harold looked at his daughter's image and added, "Tomorrow, she'll exist again, as she always was." And with that certainty, they left the light on in the room, as if her presence still lived there. The sun had barely touched the windows when Lydia and Harold parked in front of Gregory's house. It was an old building, surrounded by tall trees and a clean but discreet garden. Lydia tightly gripped the strap of her purse in her lap, as if she still needed to hold on to some physical proof that all of this was real. Gregory opened the door before they even rang the bell, as if he had been waiting for them. He was a man of quiet speech, serene expression, carefully combed grey hair, and brown eyes behind small glasses. He invited them in with a gesture and a short phrase. "I've prepared for this day." Inside the house, the environment was silent and orderly, with antique furniture and an atmosphere of trust. Lydia and Harold sat in front of a dark wooden table, where Gregory placed a small keyring on a metal safe embedded in the wall. With calm movements, he turned the combination and removed a leather folder from inside. Upon opening it, his fingers respectfully touched the document. "Emily came to me a few months ago. She said she needed to protect what she loved." He pulled out a sheet with official seals and signatures. Lydia held her breath. Gregory continued, "She left everything to you, with digital and physical recognition, and she included an observation about Peter." Gregory handed the paper to Lydia, who took a few seconds to focus on reading it. Emily's name appeared several times, alongside words confirming the donation of the house, savings, and copyrights. At the end, a phrase highlighted in black ink, "I leave nothing to someone who never saw me as a human being." Lydia felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. She just pressed the paper against her chest. Harold then spoke. She knew he would try something. "That's why she sought you out." Gregory nodded slowly. "She feared being silenced. That's why she left a copy with me and said, 'If something happens, my mother will need this more than anything.'" Harold stood up with momentum, already taking the cell phone from his pocket. "We're going straight to court. We have everything we need." Lydia was still holding the will, but her eyes were fixed on Gregory's. "She trusted you, and you kept everything with such care." Gregory smiled, but his eyes were also watery. She was stronger than she appeared, and sadder than she let show. Lydia nodded slowly. "I should have asked more. She always smiled, even when she carried the world on her back." While Gregory returned to secure the safe, Harold was already speaking with the city's public attorney, scheduling an urgent appointment. Lydia observed the folder on the table. "This paper is all she left us, but it's also the only way to recover the truth." Harold looked at her firmly. "And we'll do it. We'll prove who she really was, and remove Peter from the shadow he created." Gregory then returned to the room and handed a second, simpler copy for immediate legal use. "Take this now. The original will remain stored should you need to prove authenticity." With the documents in hand, Lydia and Harold thanked them and said goodbye. Outside, the sun finally warmed the morning, but the weight in their hearts was still heavy. In the car, Lydia kept the envelope on her lap as if holding something sacred. She trusted so much, even knowing the end could come without warning. Harold started the engine and murmured, "And now it's our turn to trust. The system will hear us. Peter won't win this time." Lydia looked out the window, watching the city pass by as if everything was moving faster now. When they arrived at the courthouse, they went straight to the filing department. The clerk immediately recognized Emily's name because of the recent exposure. Harold quickly explained the situation while Lydia handed over the documents. The legal team analyzed the papers, verifying the seals and signatures. A woman from the team stood up to call the person responsible for urgent case registration. A few minutes later, they were in a private room with a legal analyst examining the original will. "This document is legitimate, and it can be used to initiate the process. Do you intend to report fraud?" Harold responded firmly. "We have sufficient evidence to prove that Peter hid and destroyed a legal document. We want to initiate action immediately." Lydia then detailed everything that had happened: the day of the funeral, the switched envelope, the attempt at public demoralization, and the exhibition of works with false authorship. The analyst noted everything, and at the end requested digital copies to complete the file. Harold connected the flash drive and handed over all the files. "She left us the trail. We just followed it." Lydia added, "He mocked her memory. He'll have to answer for every lie." The man finalized the filing. "In the coming days, the summons will be issued, and he will have to appear at the hearing. What he destroyed, justice can restore." As they left the building, Lydia and Harold walked unhurriedly. They knew there was still much ahead, but each step seemed firmer now. Lydia spoke, without taking her eyes off the street. "She's no longer here, but everything she did can still flourish, and no one will erase that." Harold agreed with a slight smile. He thought he was alone on stage. Little does he know the show hasn't even begun. As they got into the car, Lydia hugged the envelope again and this time allowed herself to smile. "Emily trusted in tomorrow, and we are starting to build it today." Back at Lydia's house, they put the papers in safekeeping. Lydia prepared tea as she used to do on mornings with her daughter, and they sat in silence for a few minutes. It was as if each sip also warmed the memory. Harold then took out a sheet of paper and began to list the next steps, notifying the press, informing those involved in the exhibition, gathering witnesses to the envelope switch. Lydia watched, attentive. "We'll unmask him where he likes to appear most, in public." Harold continued without taking his eyes off the list, and with the same voice he tried to silence, Emily's. The clock marked the end of the morning when a notification arrived on Lydia's phone. The newspaper that had published the report on the authorship of the works was requesting an interview. They wanted to hear the true story. Lydia looked at Harold, who simply nodded. "It's time to say what she couldn't say. Let's show that her truth is stronger than any fabricated lie." Harold held her hand tightly. "And we'll do it with every word he tried to hide. It's all recorded, and now it will all echo." 2 weeks later, Peter found an envelope with the justice seal at his door. Tearing open the seal, he read with widened eyes each line that confirmed what he had feared so much. He was being formally sued for forgery, destruction of a legal document, and misappropriation of property. His hands began to sweat, his chest tightened, and he threw the paper against the wall. The house now seemed smaller, stifling, surrounded by walls that were finally beginning to collapse. "They won't succeed, I still control this story," he muttered, staring at his own reflection in the window glass. Without thinking, Peter drove to Lydia's house, parking in front with the engine still running. He got out with hard steps and entered without being invited. Lydia, sitting in the armchair with a notebook on her lap, didn't stand up. Peter pointed his finger, trembling with rage, and shouted that she was destroying his life with lies. Lydia remained firm, without changing her breathing. "You'll pay for this, you crazy old woman. I'll spread everything I know about your family," he vociferated. Without raising her voice, she pressed the button on the small recorder in her hand and said, "Continue, Peter. Continue digging your own grave." Harold appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a cloth and observing Peter with a look of weariness and contempt. He walked up to him and spoke calmly, yet firmly. "Your own father is against you. Imagine who else will walk away." Peter stepped back, realizing he was alone in this war. As he left, he slammed the door shut, but said nothing more. "He's beginning to realize he has nowhere left to hide," said Harold, calmly returning to the table. The next morning, Lydia read with surprise the news that the art gallery had removed all works signed by Peter. The justification was clear: fraud in authorship. Headlines exposed his attempt to appropriate his deceased wife's art. Lydia scanned the photos of the removed works and felt a silent relief. "Emily, your voice is beginning to be heard," she whispered, as she placed the article in a folder marked with her daughter's name. Gregory arrived at court to give his testimony, wearing a dark suit and bringing with him a serenity that commanded respect. In his testimony, he confirmed the authenticity of the will, the digital signature and physical recognition. He reported how Emily blindly trusted her mother and feared that Peter would ruin everything she had built. The judge listened attentively, taking notes and nodding. She said Peter was a shadow. "Today he is merely noise," Gregory concluded, with a look laden with truth. The preliminary hearing continued, and faced with incontestable evidence, the judge recognized the validity of the will delivered by Gregory. Peter remained silent, without even raising his gaze. At the end, the judge determined that all assets should be immediately returned to the legal heir, Lydia. The decision was read aloud, and each word seemed to weigh like stone on Peter's shoulders. "Justice isn't swift, but when it arrives whole," thought Lydia, firmly holding Harold's hand. Hours later, officers arrived at the house to deliver the eviction order. Peter, stunned, was instructed to vacate the property within 48 hours. Without protest, he began gathering his belongings in boxes, each object a reminder of what he had lost. The curtains, the replaced paintings, everything now seemed out of place. Meanwhile, the cook who had resigned appeared to collect her things, and seeing him there, just shook her head in silence. "You killed the soul of this house when you erased her presence," she said as she left. The next morning, Lydia woke up to a call from the local press. Articles were starting to pop up, featuring interviews with people who knew Emily and refuting the image Peter had tried to build. A reporter asked if she wanted to comment on the return of the house. Lydia took a deep breath and only replied, "I didn't recover a house. I recovered my daughter's dignity." After that, she hung up and walked to Emily's old room, now empty, but with walls still impregnated with the memory of who lived there with truth. Leaving the courthouse, after the confirmation of all decisions, Peter crossed paths with Lydia in the lobby. His eyes were filled with hatred, red, defeated, but still proud. He walked slowly toward her, as if expecting a confrontation. Lydia didn't back down. When he stopped in front of her, she raised her chin, looked into his eyes and said firmly, "Emily always knew you didn't deserve even the ground she walked on." Peter didn't respond. He just turned his back and left in silence. That night, Harold and Lydia sat on the porch observing the clear sky. Between them, a folder with documents already forwarded for the final procedures. The pain of Emily's absence still lived in every corner, but there was also a sense of justice fulfilled. Lydia held Harold's hand and said, "She's gone, but left a trail of courage, and now no one will erase that anymore." The silence that enveloped them wasn't one of grief, but of relief. A silence that said the worst had passed. Peter stared fixedly at the cracked mirror of the small apartment where he now lived, with stained walls and worn carpet that complained with each of his steps. His eyes, once cold, were sunken and moist, and his poorly trimmed beard didn't hide the despair stamped on his face. On the table, some scattered coins, overdue bills and a torn envelope carrying the eviction notice. He had sold the car, sold the furniture from the old house, and even the few personal items that remained, but nothing seemed enough to escape ruin. In the living room, a forgotten painting by Emily, covered by a thin cloth, caught his attention like a silent ghost that refused to leave. He approached, pulled the cloth slowly and faced the smile of the woman he said he loved, but whom he had betrayed with the worst kind of neglect. "She looked at me like this the day I said I didn't have time to talk, and now this is all that's left." He let himself fall onto the torn sofa, whispering, "All that she was is here, and I was only capable of erasing." At that same moment, in another part of the city, Lydia was finishing aligning the last details of the gallery. The newly installed sign gleamed under the morning sun, with soft and firm letters that read, "White Scar." The walls of the space shone with light tones, and Emily's paintings were arranged with delicacy and respect, each accompanied by a small plaque telling the story behind the work. Children, accompanied by teachers, explored the rooms with curiosity, while Gregory adjusted the final touches in the interactive exhibition room. Lydia observed everything from a distance, with teary eyes and an upright posture, like someone carrying the weight of many silences overcome. "You didn't die, Emily. You just turned into light, and now you illuminate every gaze that enters through these doors," she said, emotional, as she touched the first hanging frame. "My daughter was art. My daughter was strength. And today, she is eternity." That late afternoon, the gallery filled with people. Old friends of Emily, former students, artists from the city and residents who had followed the story from afar. Harold arrived punctually, wearing a simple but impeccable jacket. He walked up to Lydia with slow but determined steps and handed her a small white flower he had taken from his garden. "She liked these," he said with a firm and affectionate voice. Lydia held the flower delicately, fixing her eyes on the colored stained glass that framed Emily's face, illuminated by the last rays of the sun. "Today is not a tribute, Harold. It's a new beginning. I promised her that I wouldn't let her fade, and I kept that promise. She lives here. She lives in me." When the inauguration ceremony began, Lydia climbed onto the small stage set up in the center of the gallery, where everyone could see her. The emotion was visible in every feature of her face, but her voice came out firm, loaded with truth. She told stories of Emily's childhood, of drawings on walls, notebooks full of colors, of the first improvised exhibition in the backyard. She said that even in the shadows of a cold marriage, her daughter never stopped creating. Emily resisted where many would have given up, and she resisted with art, with beauty, with soul. This gallery is the body she left to continue walking among us. The people with bright eyes fell silent with respect. My daughter was not a victim. She was hope. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Peter was finishing packing his last clothes in an old suitcase. The apartment he had managed to rent with the little he had left was dark, stuffy, and sad. He sat on the closed suitcase and looked around. Nothing resembled the comfortable life of before, and not even the walls knew what comfort meant. Upon opening one of the last boxes, he found one of Emily's handkerchiefs carefully folded. He smelled the fabric and closed his eyes, as if he could go back in time. "You trusted me, and I did everything the opposite. I lied. I stole. I erased you, as if you were nothing." Finally, he held the handkerchief against his chest, and for the first time cried without restraint. "I destroyed what I never had the right to touch." At the same moment in the gallery, Gregory approached Lydia with a contained smile. "Visitation has already exceeded 100 people just this morning," he said with satisfaction. "And they've already asked if there will be workshops, traveling exhibitions, projects with schools." Lydia smiled with gratitude and a gleam of pride in her eyes. "This gallery will live, Gregory. It will grow and reach people who never knew Emily, but will feel what she left behind. They will feel what it's like to have a soul drawn in lines and paints." Gregory nodded, lightly touching her shoulder. "She told me once that she was only afraid of being forgotten. That will never happen." Lydia responded softly, as if it were for Emily. "Now everyone will remember. Everyone will know who you were." At another moment that night, Harold was talking with a group of young people in front of the wall where Emily's paintings from the Reflections series were displayed. He told how she would spend hours painting in the light of the porch, always in silence with a cup of tea and distant eyes. She saw what no one else could see, and even when she wasn't heard, she never stopped speaking through colors. A teenage girl interrupted him with a sparkle in her eyes. "It's as if she was still here. I've never seen anything so alive." Harold smiled with a choked voice. "She is. Every stroke here pulses like her heart, and now each of you carries a piece of that light." He then completed in thought, "She transformed me. She transformed us." Near the gallery exit, Lydia met an elderly man with grey hair who was holding a notebook. "I'm a journalist. I came to cover the inauguration, and honestly, I didn't expect to leave here so touched." Lydia thanked him with a slight nod, and he continued, "May I write not only about the artist, but about the mother who fought to give her daughter a voice. What you did was not just justice, it was love." She nodded with teary eyes. "Write, write everything." because this story belongs to all mothers who couldn't scream, but who will now be heard. As she watched the journalist walk away, she murmured, "May your truth, Emily, echo on every page." Later, when the last guests were already saying goodbye, Lydia walked to the room where Emily's largest painting hung, a work called Blue Silence. She stood there for a while motionless, feeling the weight and lightness of that moment. The gallery was empty, but the space seemed full of whispers, forgotten laughter, ancient footsteps. Harold approached silently, and they stood side by side, just looking. "I think she's at rest now, Lydia." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and replied, "She didn't rest, Harold. She blossomed." As she touched the frame with her fingertips, she added quietly, "And so did I." Did you enjoy Lydia and Emily's story? Then subscribe to the channel, comment which city you're watching this beautiful story from, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on screen. I'll see you there. The afternoon sun drew elongated shadows on the wooden floor of the spacious farmhouse porch. Mary Claire, a 17-year-old girl with long black hair that framed her delicate face with indigenous features, contemplated the horizon with teary eyes. In her trembling hands, she held a paper that seemed to weigh a ton, the result of the medical exam that confirmed her pregnancy of almost 3 months. The gentle wind swayed her simple cotton dress as she tried to gather courage to face her father. Tears silently rolled down her tanned face, and she whispered to herself like a mantra, "I have to be strong, for me and my baby. Mom would give me courage if she were here." Mary Claire took a deep breath and entered the main farmhouse, an imposing structure that displayed the wealth her family had accumulated over generations. The interior was decorated with antique and valuable furniture, silent witnesses to the history of that family. In the main room, her father, August, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and a face marked by work in the sun, was sitting at the large, solid wooden table, analyzing papers with an increasingly somber expression. Mary Claire observed him for a few seconds before announcing her presence, noticing how her father's broad shoulders seemed bent under the weight of worries. The deep wrinkles on his forehead revealed that the news wasn't good. She hesitated at the door, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to leap from her chest. August looked up and saw her standing there, with the crumpled paper in her hands and her face wet with tears. "What happened, daughter? Why are you crying like this?" he asked, momentarily forgetting his own problems. "Dad, I have something very serious to tell you," Mary Claire began, her voice failing as she approached the table. The smell of leather and earth permeated the environment, mixing with the aroma of coffee that her father always kept beside him during his afternoons of work. She placed the exam result on the table next to the farm's accounting books. August looked at the paper without initially understanding, until his eyes caught the words that changed everything. Positive result. Pregnancy confirmed. His face, previously concerned, transformed into a mask of shock and then anger. He rose abruptly, causing the wooden chair to scrape across the floor with a strident noise. "This must be a lie. How could you do this to me? To our family?" he vociferated, as Mary Claire took a step back, frightened by her father's explosive reaction. "It was an accident, Dad. Justin and I, we loved each other," Mary Claire tried to explain, as tears returned forcefully. The mention of her boyfriend's name seemed to inflame August's anger even more, who now paced the room like a caged animal. His clenched fists and red face betrayed the storm forming inside him. The farmer suddenly stopped and faced his daughter, with eyes that seemed to shoot flames. "And where is that boy now? Why isn't he here taking responsibility for what he did?" he questioned, his voice thundering through the spacious room. Mary Claire lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of shame and abandonment. The silence that followed was more painful than any scream. He ran away yesterday when I told him about the baby. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and that his family would never accept it, she finally confessed, feeling as if each word was a blade cutting her heart. "Coward son of a... son." August restrained himself before completing the insult, but his face, contorted with fury, made his thoughts clear. He approached the table again and grabbed the papers he had been analyzing, waving them in the air as if they were evidence of a crime. "Do you know what these papers are, Mary Claire? They're the farm's accounts. We're on the brink of ruin because of the drought that has lasted for months. The cattle are dying, the crops are dry. And now this? He threw the papers on the table forcefully, causing some to slide and fall to the floor. Mary Claire had never seen her father so out of control. He had always been a proud man who maintained his composure even in the most difficult situations. August ran his hands through his grey hair, pulling it slightly in a gesture of despair. "I worked my entire life to build all this, to secure our future, and now I see everything crumbling before my eyes. And you bring this shame into my house." The heavy silence that followed was interrupted only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall and Mary Claire's contained crying. She tried to approach her father, extending her hand in a gesture of supplication. "Dad, I know I made a mistake, but it's your grandson or granddaughter I'm carrying. Please, help me. I have nowhere to go," she begged, her voice choked. August stepped back as if his daughter's touch could burn him. His eyes, once full of fury, now conveyed a coldness that cut deeper into Mary Claire's heart than any cruel word. He walked to a desk drawer, opened it, and removed a small envelope. "Everyone in town will talk. The proud farmer August, who spoke so much of honor and tradition, now has an unmarried and pregnant daughter," he muttered, more to himself than to Mary Claire. "My reputation, built over decades, destroyed in an instant." August threw the envelope on the table. The sound of paper meeting wood echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. Inside were some bills and coins, all he could spare in that moment of financial crisis. "Gather your things and disappear from this house," he shouted, his eyes filled with rage and hurt. "I didn't raise a daughter to shame me like this." The words hit Mary Claire like physical blows, making her stagger. She looked at her father, searching for some sign of regret, some crack in the armor of wounded pride he wore, but found only determination and coldness. Tears now flowed freely down the young woman's face, blurring her vision. She took the envelope with trembling hands, knowing that money was all she would have to restart her life. "Dad, please don't do this. Mom would never forgive you for throwing me out like this." She tried one last time, mentioning her mother who had died years earlier. The mention of his dead wife seemed to shake August for a moment. A flash of pain crossed his gaze, but was quickly replaced by the same hard expression. "Don't use your mother to manipulate me. She would be as disappointed as I am," he replied, turning his back to not show his own emotion that threatened to break his facade of rigidity. Mary Claire felt her legs weaken, but gathered what dignity she had left and walked slowly to her room. Each step was like walking on broken glass. Each breath hurt as if the air was laden with thorns. She opened the door to the room that had been her sanctuary throughout her life and looked around, knowing it would be the last time. With mechanical movements, she opened a small suitcase and began to put in some clothes, choosing practical and durable pieces, ignoring the pretty dresses her father had given her in happier times. Among the essential items, she saved her mother's photograph, the only truly valuable object she owned. The image smiled from inside the simple frame, the same eyes as Mary Claire's shining with kindness. "Mum, give me strength to move forward," she murmured, caressing the glass of the frame as if she could touch the face of the woman she missed so much at that moment. When Mary Claire came down the stairs with a small suitcase, she found the room empty. She looked around one last time, committing to memory every detail of that place that had been her home. The envelope with the money remained on the table, untouched. She picked it up and put it in her dress pocket, feeling the weight of that forced charity. With slow steps, she headed to the front door, secretly hoping that her father would appear to prevent her from leaving, to say he had changed his mind. But the silence of the house was deafening, interrupted only by the occasional creaking of the old wood and by the wind that was beginning to blow stronger outside. As she stepped onto the porch, Mary Claire noticed that the sky, previously clear, was now loaded with dark and threatening clouds. The irony did not escape her. The storm forming in the sky was a perfect reflection of the storm in her life. She closed the door behind her without looking back, descended the porch steps and began walking along the dirt path that led to the main gate of the farm. Each step took her away from the only world she knew, leading her to an uncertain and frightening future. The sky darkened quickly, as if night was in a hurry to fall upon the world. When Mary Claire reached the wooden gate that delimited the property, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, marking the dry earth with small craters. She opened the gate and passed to the other side, symbolically crossing the boundary between her old life and the unknown that awaited her. The rain intensified with each second, soaking her clothes and hair. Mary Claire looked back one last time, toward the farmhouse. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out the silhouette of her father in the living room window. For a moment, she felt a pang of hope. Perhaps he had regretted. Perhaps he was about to call her back. But then she saw August closing the curtains with a brusque movement, literally turning his back on her and her desperate situation. That final gesture of rejection pierced her heart like a sharp dagger. "Goodbye, father," she whispered to herself, the words lost in the noise of the rain that now fell violently. "One day you'll realize that you lost not only a daughter, but also a grandchild." The rural road was quickly turning into a muddy mess under the torrential rain. Mary Claire walked with difficulty, the small suitcase weighing in her hand, her shoes sinking into the mud with each step. Water ran down her face, mixing with the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Her thoughts were a confused whirlwind. Where to go? Who could help her? What would become of her and the baby she carried? The nearest town was several kilometers away, and she wasn't sure if she could make it there in these conditions. The dark sky was periodically illuminated by lightning, followed by deafening thunder, adding to the scene of despair. Suddenly, a car's headlight cut through the darkness, approaching rapidly. Mary Claire felt a flash of hope. Perhaps she could ask for a ride. She positioned herself at the edge of the road, waving desperately, but the vehicle didn't slow down. On the contrary, as it passed through a large puddle, it sent a wave of mud that hit Mary Claire full on, soaking her even more and dirtying her already wet clothes. The car continued on, disappearing into the darkness of the stormy night, leaving behind only the trail of its taillights and a young woman even more helpless. "Even strangers treat me as if I'm worthless," she muttered, trying to clean the mud from her face and dress uselessly. It was in this moment of absolute despair that Mary Claire realized something was wrong. Instinctively, she touched the pocket of her dress where she had kept the envelope with the money. The pocket was empty. Seized by panic, she began to frantically check her other pockets, the suitcase, even looking at the muddy ground around her. Nothing. The envelope had disappeared, probably fallen during the walk, or when she was hit by the mud from the passing car. A moan of despair escaped her lips as she fell to her knees in the mud, overcome by the weight of the situation. She was alone, pregnant, without money, and in the middle of a violent storm. No family, no friends, no resources. For the first time since receiving the news of her pregnancy, Mary Claire felt the full weight of reality. It wasn't just about her now. There was a life inside her, an innocent life that depended entirely on her decisions and her ability to survive. She embraced her own belly in a protective gesture, feeling a new determination arise amid the despair. "We'll survive, my baby," she promised, struggling to get up from the mud. "I don't know how, I don't know where, but we'll find a way. It's just the two of us now, and I'll fight for you with all my strength." The rain continued to fall mercilessly. The wind howled through the trees, and the path ahead was dark and uncertain. But Mary Claire took one step forward, then another, and another. Each step was a silent promise to the child she carried, an affirmation that even in the most adverse circumstances, she would find the strength to move forward. The road stretched before her, losing itself in the darkness of the stormy night, leading her to a future she could not predict. But in her heart was a certainty. This would not be the last page of her story. "One day, I'll return to this farm," she thought with a determination that surprised even herself. "And when that day comes, I will no longer be the same Mary Claire who is being expelled today. I will be stronger, wiser, and I will show my father the true meaning of family and forgiveness." Months later, the corridor of the municipal hospital gleamed under the fluorescent light, reflecting on the floor that Mary Claire had just cleaned. Her movements were careful, calculated not to demand too much effort from her body, increasingly heavy from the advanced pregnancy. The prominent 8-month belly stretched the simple janitor's uniform as she maneuvered the mop with the practice acquired during months of hard work. Her face, once youthful and carefree, now carried deep dark circles, silent witnesses to sleepless nights and constant worry about the future. Her hair, once loose and shiny, was now tied in a simple and lifeless bun. Despite the evident fatigue, her eyes still retained a fierce determination. the same that had kept her alive since that stormy night when she was expelled from home. Mary Claire stopped for a moment, leaning on the mop handle to relieve the pain in her back, and caressed her belly tenderly. "We're almost there, my love. Soon you'll be in my arms, and I promise I'll do everything so you can have a better life than mine," she whispered to the baby moving inside her, as if responding to the sound of his mother's voice. Serious voices echoed down the hallway, coming from the doctor's meeting room. Mary Claire didn't intend to hear other people's conversations, but the words reached her with worrying clarity. The doctors were discussing the precarious situation of the hospital, lack of medications, obsolete equipment, insufficient staff. She continued cleaning, involuntarily approaching the partially open door. "With these budget cuts, I don't know how we're going to keep the maternity ward functioning properly. We're already operating at the limit," said a deep, tired male voice that Mary Claire recognized as Dr. Paul, the chief physician of the obstetrics wing. "We have high-risk pregnant women arriving every day, and we don't have enough resources to care for them," he continued, the frustration evident in his voice. Mary Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew she would be one of those mothers soon, completely dependent on the precarious structure of the public hospital. A knot formed in her throat as dark thoughts invaded her mind. What if there were complications? What if the baby needed special care? Without family, without resources, she and her child would be at the mercy of luck and the goodwill of others. "Even if the whole world turns its back on you, my child, your mother will never abandon you. If necessary, I'll work 3 jobs, but you will have everything you need," she silently vowed, feeling the baby move as if in response to her promise. The shift seemed endless that day. With each corridor cleaned, Mary Claire felt her strength diminishing. The weight of her belly, the lower back pain, and the lack of adequate sleep were beginning to take their toll. She had slept only 4 hours the night before, worried about the rent for the small room at the back of Sarah's house. The nurse had been her salvation when she arrived in town, penniless and desperate. She found her crying on a bench in the central square, soaked by rain, and offered her shelter. It was also Sarah who got her the cleaning job at the hospital. Mary Claire owed everything to that middle-aged, lonely woman with a generous heart, who treated her almost like a daughter. However, the feeling of being a burden constantly weighed on her shoulders. Her father's cruel words still echoed in her mind in moments of weakness. "I didn't raise a daughter to embarrass me like this." She shook her head, trying to push away the painful memories, and continued pushing the cleaning cart down the hall. A doctor rushed past, almost knocking over the cleaning products. He didn't even look at her. She was invisible, like all the cleaning staff. "One day people will look at me with respect. People will look. My son will be proud to say I am his mother, and he will never know how much I struggled and suffered to give him a dignified life," she promised herself, as she watched the doctor disappear around the corner of the hallway, completely oblivious to her existence. The world suddenly began to spin. The corridor lights seemed to multiply and dance before Mary Claire's eyes. Cold sweat covered her forehead, while a feeling of nausea rose up her throat. She tried to lean on the cleaning cart, but her knees gave way. The mop slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. She would have fallen too, if it weren't for the strong arms that supported her at the last moment. "Mary Claire, what's happening? Talk to me." The concerned voice belonged to Sarah, who was passing through the corridor at that providential moment. The nurse, a robust woman with a kind face and graying hair, held Mary Claire firmly, preventing her from completely fainting. Other people began to gather around, attracted by the commotion. Mary Claire tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. Her legs seemed made of cotton, and dark spots danced in her vision. "Call Dr. Paul, quickly," ordered Sarah, her normally sweet voice now laden with authority. "She's a high-risk pregnancy, almost fainting. We need to take her to an examination room immediately." Mary Claire felt herself being guided to a stretcher. Gentle hands helped her lie down, while concerned voices discussed around her. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Sarah's anguished face, holding her hand as if through that touch she could transmit the strength that Mary Claire lacked at that moment. When Mary Claire fully regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital ward bed. An IV dripped slowly, connected to her arm by a needle. Dr. Paul, a middle-aged man with graying hair at the temples and thin-framed glasses, examined her medical chart with a grave expression. Upon noticing she had awakened, he approached the bed. "Mary Claire, you gave us quite a scare," he said, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and tests indicate severe anemia. These are very serious complications in pregnancy, both for you and the baby." Mary Claire tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her to lie down again. Her concern for the baby was so intense, it almost overshadowed the fear for her own health. "My baby. Is he all right, doctor?" she asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. The doctor held her hand gently, a professional gesture but loaded with humanity. "For now, yes. But if you continue like this, both of you are at risk. You need to rest and eat better," he warned her, seriously. "Your baby is at risk, Mary Claire. Your body is fighting to keep both of you alive, but it's not receiving the necessary nutrients. You need absolute rest and proper nutrition in the coming weeks, or the consequences could be severe." Tears began to stream down Mary Claire's pale face. She knew the doctor was right, but the cruel reality of her situation didn't allow the luxury of rest. Each working day meant food on the table and a roof over her head. If she stopped, she would lose everything again. "Doctor, I can't stop working," she explained, her voice choked with tears. "If I lose this job, I won't be able to support myself. I'm already a burden to Sarah. If I don't pay rent for the small room, I'll have nowhere to live when the baby is born." The desperation in her voice was palpable, causing the doctor to furrow his brow, visibly disturbed by the situation. Mary Claire continued, the words coming out in a painful outburst. "I have no family, nowhere to go. My father kicked me out when he found out about the pregnancy, and my child's father ran away. I'm completely alone in this world, doctor. This job is all I have. It's the only thing that allows me to dream of a future for my child." Her hands caressed her prominent belly as she spoke, as if trying to protect the baby from the harsh truths they were forced to face. Dr. Paul sighed deeply, removing his glasses to massage the bridge of his nose, a gesture that denoted both fatigue and compassion. He had seen many sad stories during his long career, but something in that young mother's determination touched him in a special way. Replacing his glasses, the doctor pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "Mary Claire, I understand your situation, but you need to grasp the severity of what's happening," he said, softening his tone of voice. "We're not just talking about fatigue or temporary indisposition. Your anemia is severe, and the elevated pressure could lead to preeclampsia, which would put your life and the baby's in real danger." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "Perhaps we can find a middle ground. I'll prescribe vitamins and supplements that will help with the anemia, and we can try to reorganize your work schedule for lighter shifts." Mary Claire observed the doctor with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. Life had taught her that help rarely came without a price. "Why are you helping me so much, doctor? I'm just a cleaner." "There are so many more important patients," she questioned, her voice low and hesitant. Dr. Paul smiled slightly, a tired smile, but genuine. "You know, Mary Claire, for a real doctor, there are no more or less important patients. Each life we can save or improve is equally valuable." He stood up and walked to a cabinet, from which he took out some boxes of medication. "These vitamins and iron supplements should only be distributed with a paid prescription, but I'll register them as free samples." He placed the medications on the small table next to the bed and continued, "As for your work, I'll speak with supervision. I'll explain that you need less strenuous tasks by medical recommendation. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances." Mary Claire felt a wave of relief mixed with deep gratitude. It was more than she expected, more than she believed she deserved. Tears returned to her eyes, but this time they were different, not of despair, but of hope. "Dr. Paul, I don't know how to thank you. I promise that as soon as my baby is born and I can return to work normally, I'll repay you somehow," she said, holding the doctor's hand in an impulsive gesture of gratitude. Night had fallen when Mary Claire finally returned to the small room at the back of Sarah's house. The space was tiny but clean and organized, a reflection of her struggle to maintain some dignity amidst adversities. A twin bed, a nightstand, a small dresser, and a small table with a chair made up all the furniture. In a corner there was a second-hand crib that Sarah had obtained from a hospital donation, the first gift for the baby that would soon arrive. Mary Claire sat carefully on the bed, exhausted after the tumultuous day. Sarah had insisted that she rest for the remainder of the week, promising to explain the situation to the hospital supervision. Her eyes wandered around the room, stopping at the small crib. It was hard to believe that in less than a month, her child would be there, completely dependent on her to survive. The weight of this responsibility was terrifying, and at the same time what kept her moving forward. A local newspaper on the small table caught her attention. Sarah must have left it there while Mary Claire was in the hospital. Driven by curiosity and the desire for distraction, she stretched out her arm to grab it. The headline on the front page made her heart race. "Traditional farm will be auctioned for debts." The photo showed the entrance to her father's property, the same gate through which she had left on that rainy night, expelled and helpless. Farmer August, known for his pride and standing in the community, lost his battle against debts accumulated during the prolonged drought, said the article. The property, one of the most traditional in the region, will go to auction next month. Mary Claire let the newspaper fall onto her lap, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions taking over her chest. On one hand, she felt a bitter satisfaction. The pride that had led her father to reject her was now making him lose everything. The irony didn't escape her. While he was losing the farm, she was building a new life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. It was a kind of poetic justice that the same pride that led him to expel his own pregnant daughter from home now left him with nothing. However, mixed with this feeling of vindication was a deep sadness. Despite everything, that farm was part of her history, the place where she grew up, where her mother had lived and died, childhood memories, the green fields before the drought, the smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings, all would be lost, sold to strangers who would never know the emotional value of those lands. And her father, the strong and authoritarian man she had always known, now faced the public humiliation of seeing his empire crumble. Mary Claire felt hot tears streaming down her face, surprised by her own reaction. After all he had done, why did she still care? "Why does it still hurt, Mom?" she whispered to her mother's photo, the only object she had brought from the farm. "He expelled me as if I were a sick animal, denied me help when I needed it most, and yet I can't completely hate him. Is this what it means to be family? This bond that hurts even when broken?" A sudden sharp pain in her lower abdomen interrupted her thoughts, making her let out an involuntary moan. It was as if a knife was being twisted inside her, a sensation completely different from the normal discomforts of pregnancy. Mary Claire gasped, waiting for the pain to pass, but instead it intensified. Instinctively she realized that something was very wrong. Panic took over her immediately, upon realizing she was having complications with the pregnancy. Panic took over her immediately. She was bleeding a lot, and knew what that meant. "No, please no," she begged aloud, as if by force of will she could stop what was happening. "My baby, no, please, stay with me." She tried to get up to reach the phone on the small table, but another violent contraction hit her, causing her to fall to her knees on the floor. The pain was so intense she could barely breathe. "Help!" she screamed, even knowing that Sarah had left for the night shift at the hospital, and there was no one to hear her desperate cries. The situation was rapidly worsening. With superhuman effort, Mary Claire tried to drag herself toward the phone, each movement a struggle against the pain and weakness she felt. Each movement was an agony, each centimeter a battle. "I'm not going to lose you," she muttered through clenched teeth, speaking to the baby as if it could hear her. "I've fought too hard, sacrificed too much to lose you now. Please, hold on just a little longer." The phone seemed to be miles away, although it was just a few meters. Mary Claire felt her strength rapidly diminishing. Her vision was beginning to blur and she struggled to maintain consciousness. Desperation grew with each second. She was alone, bleeding profusely, unable to reach help. Terrible thoughts invaded her mind. What if she died there on that cold floor with no one to help? What if her child died before even having a chance to live? All the sacrifices, all the struggle would have been in vain. "I can't give up now," she told herself, gathering the last of her remaining strength. With fierce determination, she continued dragging herself toward the phone, inch by inch, ignoring the excruciating pain and paralyzing fear. Each movement was an act of pure will, guided by desperate love for the life she carried within. "We will survive," she repeated like a mantra, her voice growing weaker. We will survive because we have to survive. Because you deserve to live, my child. Because you deserve more than to end like this, before you even begin." The phone was now just inches from her outstretched fingers. Mary Claire made one final effort, stretching her arm as far as she could, her muscles trembling with exertion. Her nails scraped the device, almost managing to grab it, but not enough to bring it closer. The world spun faster and faster around her, and darkness began to swallow her. The last thing she felt before losing consciousness was the baby's movement inside her. A kick, as if protesting against the cruel fate that awaited them. "Forgive me," whispered Mary Claire as darkness completely enveloped her. "Your mother tried. God, how I tried." Some time later, golden morning light filtered through the simple curtains of the small apartment, illuminating the kitchen table where Mary Claire and Michael were having breakfast. The apartment, though modest, was clean and welcoming, a true home built with sacrifice and love. The living room walls displayed Michael's colorful drawings and his photos at different ages, documenting the growth of the boy who now turned 8. Mary Claire watched her son as he devoured his pancakes with enthusiasm. Michael was a bright boy with lively eyes and an easy smile, with the same delicate features she had in her youth, but with a curiosity and vivacity that were exclusively his. Anyone looking at that domestic scene would never imagine the obstacles Mary Claire had overcome to get there. After that terrible night when she almost lost her baby, she fought with all her strength to survive and give birth to her son. Thanks to Sarah, who found her unconscious and quickly took her to the hospital, both survived. Since then, Mary Claire dedicated herself tirelessly to her studies, graduating in nursing while working and raising her son. Now she was the head nurse of the pediatric ward at the same hospital where she once worked as a janitor. "Mum, can I take my new science book to show my teacher today? I think she'll like to see the experiments I marked," asked Michael, interrupting Mary Claire's thoughts. She smiled with pride. Her son was already showing interest in science, and she made a point of encouraging him in everything. "Of course you can, my love. I'm sure your teacher will be impressed with your interest." The phone rang, breaking the tranquility of that routine morning. Mary Claire frowned. It was only 7 in the morning, too early for work calls. She rose from the table and answered cautiously. "Hello, who's speaking?" The voice on the other end of the line was trembling and elderly, but strangely familiar, like a distant echo of a life Mary Claire had left behind. "Mary Claire, is that really you? Thank God I found you after searching for so long." It was Dorothy, the former maid from her father's farm, the woman who had cared for her throughout her childhood after her mother's death. Mary Claire felt her heart race as a whirlwind of long-repressed memories came rushing back. "Dorothy, how did you find me?" she asked, moving away slightly so Michael wouldn't hear the conversation. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotion she was trying to control. The elderly woman on the other end of the line sobbed before responding. "It wasn't easy, my girl. Years of searching, asking around. A nurse named Sarah finally told me where you were after I explained the situation. Mary Claire, I'm calling about your father." The mention of August made Mary Claire stiffen, her body instantly tensing. 8 years had passed since that rainy night, but the pain of rejection still burned like a poorly healed wound. What happened to him? Finally lost everything because of his arrogance. The words came out harsher than she intended, loaded with resentment she had never completely overcome. "He's dying, Mary Claire." Dorothy's voice broke completely. "He's been hospitalized for 2 weeks with severe kidney failure. The doctors say without an urgent transplant, he won't survive more than a month." The old maid paused, during which Mary Claire could hear her restrained crying. "He's in the municipal hospital, Mary Claire, in the same hospital where you work, from what I've been told. He doesn't know you're there, doesn't know I have your contact. I'm calling in secret because, despite everything that happened, I know you have a good heart, just like your mother had." The impact of those words hit Mary Claire like a physical blow. Her father, the man who had thrown her out of the house in her most vulnerable moment, was now equally vulnerable, depending on the help of strangers to survive. The irony of the situation didn't escape her. She felt the weight of Michael's curious gaze, who observed her expression transformed by the unexpected news. Is he alone?" she finally asked, her voice low. Dorothy sighed on the other end of the line. "Completely alone, my child. After he lost the farm, he distanced himself from everyone. Pride, always pride. He wouldn't even allow me to stay by his side in recent years. I only found out he was hospitalized because an old acquaintance informed me. When I visited him, he was unconscious, connected to so many machines. He's no longer the strong man you knew, Mary Claire. He's withering away each day. The old maid made a significant pause before continuing. He never admitted it, but I know that during all these years, his greatest regret was sending you away. He tried to find you after he lost everything, but it was too late. You had disappeared. Mary Claire hung up the phone with trembling hands. She felt dazed, as if the world around her was spinning rapidly. Her father was dying in the same hospital where she had worked for years. How many times might she have passed near him without knowing? The idea that they might have crossed paths, unknown to each other, caused a strange sensation in her chest. She returned to the table where Michael was watching her with curious eyes. "Who was it, Mum? You look like you've seen a ghost," commented the boy, perceptive as always. Mary Claire forced a smile, trying to regain her composure. "It was an old family acquaintance, darling. Nothing important." Lying to her son wasn't something she liked to do, but she wasn't ready to explain the complexity of the situation. Michael had never known about his grandfather, about the rejection, about the rainy night when his mother was thrown out of the house. For him, the story had always been simple. His biological father had left before his birth, and his mother had raised him alone, with the help of good friends like Sarah and Dr. Paul. She had never mentioned the existence of a grandfather, a farm, a lost family inheritance. Throughout the day at work, Mary Claire couldn't concentrate. The news about her father occupied every inch of her thoughts. Several times, she was on the verge of going up to the nephrology floor, only to hesitate at the last moment. "What should I do, Mother?" she whispered to herself while organizing medical records. "He threw me out when I needed him most, tossed me onto the street without caring if we would live or die. Should I simply forget that? Should I forgive a man who never asked for forgiveness?" The shift was almost ending when Mary Claire finally gathered the courage to go up to the nephrology department. She told herself it was just curiosity, that she only wanted to see with her own eyes the state of her father. Nothing more, no commitments, no reconciliations, just an observation. Her heart was beating erratically as the elevator slowly ascended. When the doors opened, she hesitated for a moment before stepping into the hallway. The nephrology sector was quiet and aseptic, dominated by the constant hum of dialysis machines. Mary Claire advanced cautiously, checking the names on the room doors. Finally, she found what she was looking for. "August," said the simple nameplate. The door was ajar, allowing her to see inside. Her father was lying in bed, looking much smaller and more fragile than in her memories. His face, once ruddy and full of life, was now pale and marked by deep wrinkles. His hair, completely white, contrasted with his yellowish skin. Tubes and wires connected his body to various machines that beeped regularly. Mary Claire felt a lump in her throat. That weakened man on the verge of death was almost unrecognizable. Where was the proud and authoritarian farmer who had expelled her from home? What remained of him now? As if sensing her presence, August slowly opened his eyes and turned his face toward the door. For a brief moment, their gazes met, past and present, colliding in an instant suspended in time. Mary Claire saw a flash of recognition in her father's tired eyes, a glimmer of surprise and something more. Regret, perhaps. Before he could say anything, she turned and walked away quickly, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to jump out of her chest. 8 years have passed and I still run from him like a frightened girl, she thought, disconcerted by her own reaction. Why do I still let him have this power over me? "Mary Claire, wait!" The familiar voice made her stop in the hallway. It was Dr. Paul, now the hospital director, but still the same kind man who had helped her in the most difficult moments. His hair was completely grey, and new wrinkles had formed around his eyes, but his gaze remained gentle and compassionate. "I saw you leaving his room." "So you already know," the doctor commented, approaching with slow steps. Mary Claire nodded, unable to articulate words at that moment. The knot in her throat had grown, threatening to transform into tears she refused to shed. Dr. Paul gently guided her to a small empty meeting room, closing the door to give them privacy. "His situation is serious, More serious than most patients we receive, he explained, sitting across from her. The kidney failure is in its terminal stage. Without a transplant, the chances are practically zero. Mary Claire looked at her own hands, trying to maintain composure. Why are you telling me this, Dr. Paul? He's just another patient among so many others, she replied, but her voice betrayed the emotion she was trying to hide. The doctor observed her carefully before responding. Because I know he's your father, Mary Claire. I've always known. When he was admitted and I saw the name on the chart, I recognized it immediately. I never mentioned it because I respected your choice to keep your distance, but now the situation is different. He paused significantly before continuing. His relatives have been tested, some distant cousins, but no one is compatible. The best chance would be a child or grandchild. You understand what I'm saying? A kidney transplant? From me or Michael? The question came out before she could contain it, revealing that despite all resistance, she was already considering the possibility. Dr. Paul nodded slowly. It's a personal and extremely delicate decision, Mary Claire. I wouldn't be bringing this up if the situation weren't so critical. I know what happened between you. I know how much you suffered because of him. No one would judge you if you chose not to help. The doctor's frankness was one of the qualities Mary Claire most admired in him. He never spoke in circles, never emotionally manipulated. He presented the facts and respected others' decisions. I need to think, she finally replied, standing up. It's too complex to decide now. The doctor also stood, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Of course, take all the time you need, but... He hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. I know this will seem like an intrusion, but I've been observing your father over the last few weeks. He's not the same man who hurt you. The illness and loneliness have transformed him. Several times I've heard him murmur your name in his sleep. Mary Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea that her father thought of her, even unconsciously, provoked conflicting feelings in her chest. Thank you for letting me know, Doctor. I promise I'll think about it, she said, heading toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. Please don't mention to him that I was here today. Not yet. I need to resolve this with myself first. That night, Mary Claire secretly performed a compatibility test. She used her position at the hospital to expedite the results, without anyone, not even Dr. Paul, knowing about her initiative. 2 days later, she received the sealed envelope with the results. Sitting alone in her office, she opened it with trembling hands. The answer was clear. She was not compatible to donate a kidney to her father. Part of her felt relief. She was free from the responsibility of making such a difficult decision. Another part, however, felt an inexplicable disappointment. As she reflected on her contradictory feelings, a disturbing idea began to form in her mind. If she wasn't compatible, perhaps Michael would be. The boy's blood was a mixture of hers and Justin's, which meant different genetic possibilities. Mary Claire immediately pushed the thought away. How could she even consider involving her son in this? Michael was just a child, innocent of the hurts and resentments of adults. He had never known his grandfather, never known of the rejection, never experienced the abandonment she had suffered. Would it be fair to drag him into this emotional turmoil? On the other hand, a life was at stake, not just any life. The life of the man who, despite everything, was her father, was Michael's grandfather. If the boy were compatible and could save his grandfather, wouldn't he have the right to know this possibility? Wouldn't he have the right to be part of this decision, even if his understanding was limited by his age? How can I decide something so serious alone? Mary Claire murmured, putting the envelope in the drawer. How can I choose between protecting my son from possible suffering or giving him the chance to know his grandfather, to perhaps build a relationship I never had? The question hung in the air without an answer, while the weight of the decision oppressed her heart. When she arrived home that night, Mary Claire found Michael sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by old boxes she kept stored at the back of the closet. Her heart almost stopped when she saw what the boy was holding in his hands. A yellowed photograph showing the old farm and, in the foreground, August in his prosperous days, next to a horse. "Michael, what are you doing? Who gave you permission to go through these boxes?" she asked more harshly than she intended, startling the boy. Michael looked at his mother with wide eyes, surprised by her unusual reaction. "Sorry, Mum. I was looking for old photos for a school project about our family, and I found these boxes in your closet," he explained, confused by the irritation of his usually calm and understanding mother. "Who is this man in the photo? Why have I never seen these photos before?" Mary Claire took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It wasn't fair to take out on her son the emotional turmoil consuming her. She sat down beside him on the floor, taking the photo in her hands. Looking at her father's face in his days of glory, so different from the worn-down man she had seen in the hospital, triggered a wave of nostalgia she hadn't expected to feel. "It's a complicated story, son," she finally answered, running her fingers over the worn surface of the photograph. Michael observed his mother with curiosity, sensing he had touched on something important. "He looks strong and important," commented the boy, pointing to August's imposing figure in the photo. "And that farm is huge. It looks like a magical place." Mary Claire couldn't hold back a sad smile. To a child's eyes, the farm must indeed have seemed like an enchanted kingdom. The green fields, the animals, the big house with its spacious porch. It was a special place, yes, she admitted, allowing herself to recall the happy moments of her childhood before everything fell apart. Michael continued examining the photograph carefully, as if trying to decipher a mystery. "He looks a bit like me, don't you think?" observed the boy, surprising Mary Claire with his perception. Indeed, there were traces of the grandfather in the grandson, the same chin shape, the same eyebrow line, subtle details she herself had never noticed before. "A little, yes," she agreed, feeling a knot forming again in her throat. Michael looked up at his mother, a question clear in his eyes even before it was formulated. "Mom, why have we never visited Grandpa?" The question, so simple and direct, hit Mary Claire like lightning. It was exactly what she feared, what she had tried to avoid during all those years. Having to explain to her son the abandonment, the rejection, the wounded pride that had separated the family. How could she tell the truth without transmitting to Michael her own resentment? How could she be fair to both the boy and August? "It's complicated, son," she began, carefully choosing her words. "Your grandfather and I, we had a falling out a long time ago, even before you were born. We decided to go our separate ways." Michael frowned, dissatisfied with the vague explanation. "But he's still my grandfather, isn't he? All my friends visit their grandparents, get presents, hear stories. Why have I never been able to meet mine?" The innocent question hid a depth that cut Mary Claire's heart. During all those years, she had kept Michael away from his grandfather, out of fear, pride, protection, but also revenge. Had she unconsciously wanted to punish August by depriving him of knowing his grandson? Does he know I exist?" asked Michael, his voice small and hesitant, fearing the answer. Mary Claire felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. Her son deserved to know some of the truth, adapted to his age. "No, Michael, he doesn't know about you," she answered, holding her son's little hand. "When I discovered the pregnancy, your grandfather and I fought a lot. He said harsh things and I left. We never spoke again." Michael listened attentively, his eyes fixed on his mother's. "So he never directly rejected me? He never said he didn't want to meet me?" he asked, surprising Mary Claire with his insight. "No, he never said that. He doesn't even know you exist," she admitted, realizing how different the situation seemed through her son's eyes. "And is he alive? Could we visit him?" The question caught her off guard. I could lie, but something inside her, the same honesty she had always taught her son, prevented her. "Yes, he's alive. Actually, he's very sick, hospitalized at the hospital where I work." Michael's eyes widened. "Can we visit him, please, Mom? I want to meet my grandfather." Mary Claire looked at her son, so small, so pure, free from the resentments that weighed on adults. Perhaps it was this innocence that everyone needed now. That night, after Michael fell asleep, Mary Claire remained awake, tormented by the moral dilemma. August's photo and the negative results of her compatibility test seemed to weigh on her. Should she submit Michael to tests too? Allowing a child to donate an organ to someone who rejected them seemed to betray her duty as a mother. However, denying this possibility could deprive grandfather and grandson of a chance to connect before it was too late. What's more important, protecting my child from the past or allowing him to build a future with his grandfather? She murmured, looking at the photograph with tired eyes. Mary Claire touched her father's face in the yellowed image. "After everything you did to me, how can you still have so much power over my life? How can you, even on the brink of death, force me into such impossible choices?" A solitary tear ran down her face as the night progressed, and the weight of the decision grew with each minute. The morning sun gently illuminated the hospital room where August rested, connected to various machines that monitored his increasingly fragile state. Mary Claire held Michael's hand as they walked down the corridor toward that long-postponed meeting. After sleepless nights reflecting on the past and future, she had finally decided to tell her son the whole truth about his grandfather, about the rejection, about the rainy night that forever changed the course of their lives. To her surprise, Michael had listened to everything with impressive serenity for a child his age. When she finished her account, fearing her son's reaction, the boy simply hugged her tightly and said, "If Grandpa is sick and needs help, we have to help, right, Mum? You always taught me that we should help people, even when they make mistakes." The innocence and natural kindness of that child, free from the resentments and hurts that contaminated the adult world, deeply moved Mary Claire. "Are you sure you want to meet him, Michael? He may not be the grandfather you imagine," she warned, stroking her son's hair. The boy nodded with determination. "I am, Mom. Everyone deserves a second chance. You always told me that." "Dad, there's someone here who wants to meet you," announced Mary Claire, her voice trembling with contained emotion as she entered the hospital room. August, who was napping lightly, opened his eyes with difficulty. When his gaze met Mary Claire's, an expression of disbelief took over his aged face. "Mary, Claire," he whispered, his voice so weak it could barely be heard. "Is it really you, or am I dreaming again?" Tears began to stream down the wrinkled face of the man, once so strong and now reduced to a fragile shadow of himself. Mary Claire felt her heart tighten at that sight. Where was the proud farmer who had expelled her from home? August tried to raise himself, but his debilitated body barely responded to the command. "Don't strain yourself, Dad," she said, approaching the bed. It was then that Michael entered the room, curiously observing the grandfather he had never known. August's eyes widened upon seeing the boy, immediately perceiving the resemblance to Mary Claire and, more surprisingly, to himself. Is this my—" He couldn't complete the sentence, overcome with emotion. "Yes, this is Michael, your grandson," confirmed Mary Claire. "Michael, this is your grandfather, August." "Hello, Grandpa," said Michael, timidly approaching the bed. "Mom told me you're sick. I hope you get better soon." The simplicity and sincerity of those words caused more tears to stream down August's face. With trembling hands, he touched the boy's face, as if fearing it was an illusion that could disappear at any moment. "My grandson," he murmured, his voice choked. "My grandson whom I never knew existed. How beautiful you are, boy. You have your grandmother's eyes." For a long moment the room was silent, filled only by the constant beeping of the machines and August's restrained crying. Mary Claire observed the scene with a lump in her throat, divided between the resentment of the past and the compassion that arose before that man broken by time and disease. Finally, August turned his eyes to her. "I was proud and cruel, Mary Claire. All these years I tried to find you to ask for forgiveness, but I didn't have the courage. When I finally discovered where I was, it was already too late. My body was abandoning me, just as I abandoned you that night." The following days were filled with intense emotional commotion for everyone. Between hospital visits, Michael underwent the necessary tests to verify his compatibility as a donor. Mary Claire remained divided, even having allowed the tests. Part of her still feared for her son, for the surgery, for complications that might arise. But Michael showed surprising determination for an 8-year-old child. "Don't be afraid, Mum," he would say with wisdom beyond his years. "If my kidney can save Grandpa, then that's what should happen." The test results confirmed what Mary Claire secretly already expected. Michael was compatible. When the news was given, August cried like a child, unable to comprehend how, after causing so much suffering, he deserved such a gift. Between tears and broken whispers, he told Mary Claire that, after losing almost everything in the financial crisis, he had managed to save a small piece of the family farm. "It's not much, just the house and a few hectares around it," he explained. "But it's our home, the place where you were born, where your mother lived and died." I managed to keep it, thinking that one day perhaps I could find you and return what is rightfully yours. On the eve of surgery, when everything finally seemed arranged, an unexpected visitor appeared at the hospital, causing commotion. Justin, Michael's biological father, who had abandoned Mary Claire upon learning of her pregnancy, emerged as if out of nowhere after 8 years of complete absence. Mary Claire was in the hallway talking with Dr. Paul about the final details of the procedure when she spotted that familiar figure approaching. Her heart raced, not from longing or love, but from apprehension and anger. Justin had changed. He was older, more built, wearing clothes that indicated certain prosperity. But the arrogant, calculating smile remained the same. "Mary Claire, long time," he said, as if they were old friends who hadn't seen each other for a few days. "I heard our son is here. I want to see him. The audacity of this man who had abandoned her and her unborn child in a time of total despair made Mary Claire tremble with indignation. "Our son? You lost the right to call him that when you ran away after learning about the pregnancy. Michael is my son, only mine." Justin smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've changed. I want to meet my son," he insisted. "I have rights as a father, you know." The confrontation in the hospital corridor attracted the attention of nurses and some patients. Dr. Paul tried to calm the tensions, suggesting they continue the conversation in a more private location. In the empty waiting room, Justin revealed his true intentions. He had heard from acquaintances in the region that old August had recovered part of his fortune and that his grandson would be the main beneficiary. "I think it's fair that, as a father, I can participate in this important moment in my son's life, and also manage any inheritance he may receive since he's a minor," he declared, without even trying to disguise his purely financial interest. Mary Claire looked at him with contempt. "After 8 years, you show up here just because of money? Michael doesn't even know who you are, Justin, and if it depends on me, he will never know what kind of man his biological father is." The tension was interrupted by Michael's unexpected arrival, coming down the corridor looking for his mother. Mary Claire felt the blood freeze in her veins when she saw her son approaching. How would she explain that situation? What would she say about that stranger who was his father? The surgery took place as planned, despite Justin's attempt to stop it with last-minute legal arguments. The on-duty judge, moved by the story and the medical urgency, denied the suspension request and authorized the procedure. Michael entered the operating room as brave as a little warrior, smiling at his anxious mother, who accompanied him as far as allowed. "Everything will be fine, Mom, don't worry," were his last words before anesthesia. The hours that followed were the longest in Mary Claire's life. Every minute seemed to drag on eternally as she waited for news in the waiting room, avoiding Justin, who remained at the hospital, now accompanied by a lawyer. Finally, Dr. Paul appeared, his face tired but smiling. "The surgery was a success. Both Michael and your father are doing well, as expected. Your son is an amazing child, Mary Claire, so young and so brave." The tears she had held back all that time finally flowed freely. Her son was well. Her father had a chance to survive. Despite all the complications, a new beginning seemed possible. During recovery, which proceeded without serious complications, August made a decision that surprised everyone. He called a lawyer to the hospital and, in the presence of witnesses, legally transferred the farm's administration to Mary Claire and registered Michael as the main heir to all his assets. "It's the least I can do after all the suffering I've caused," he explained to his daughter. "I can't change the past, but I can try to fix the future." Justin, upon learning of the decision, intensified his attempts to get closer to Michael, visiting him frequently in the hospital, bringing gifts and trying to create a bond. However, the boy, as perceptive as his mother, soon realized the true intentions behind that sudden display of paternal affection. "He only shows up when Grandpa is around and always talks about the farm and what he'll do when he's an adult," Michael commented to his mother. "I don't like him, Mum. He doesn't look into my eyes when he talks to me like you and Grandpa do." After hearing Michael's perceptive observation about Justin, Mary Claire felt a renewed strength arise within her. She would not allow that man to disturb the peace she had fought so hard to build. When she met Justin in the hospital corridor, "I heard what my son said about you, and he's right," she declared, staring at him firmly. "Michael realized in a week what you really are, something that took me months to see when we were young. I want you to disappear from our lives. We have nothing for you but the contempt you deserve." Justin tried to argue, mentioning his legal rights, but Mary Claire interrupted him. "I've already consulted a lawyer. You abandoned your son before he was even born, never paid child support, never looked for him in 8 years. Any judge will see your intentions for what they really are. If you insist, we'll go to court, and I guarantee you'll leave not only without money but also publicly humiliated. This is your only chance to leave with dignity." Faced with Mary Claire's unwavering determination, Justin finally backed down, realizing that his battle was lost. He never again sought out Michael or Mary Claire. 6 months after the surgery, the family was finally reunited at the old farm, now partially recovered thanks to Mary Claire's tireless work. August, although still fragile, had exceeded medical expectations and enjoyed the companionship of his daughter and grandson, trying to make up for lost years with stories about the family's past and teaching Michael the secrets of rural life. On a quiet Sunday morning, Mary Claire went to wake her father for breakfast, but found him serene in his bed, as if in deep sleep. August had passed away during the night, peacefully, reconciled with his daughter and having known and loved his grandson. Next to his body, a sealed letter addressed to Mary Claire and Michael. With tears in her eyes, she read her father's farewell words and regret, his request for forgiveness for the mistakes made, and his gratitude for the second chance he received at the end of his life. "I spent so much time clinging to pride that I almost lost what really mattered," he wrote. "Thanks to the kindness of you both, I can depart in peace, knowing that my daughter and grandson will be fine and that our land will remain in the family's hands." The sunset painted the sky in orange hues as Mary Claire and Michael sat on the porch of the farmhouse, now renovated and full of life again. The property began to prosper under Mary Claire's dedicated care, who had transformed part of the land into a rural clinic to provide free care to pregnant women in vulnerable situations. It was her way of transforming her own pain into purpose, of preventing other young women from going through the same suffering she had faced. Michael, now almost 9 years old, rested his head on his mother's shoulder as they observed the horizon together. "I miss Grandpa," he commented softly. Mary Claire embraced her son tenderly, silently thanking for that extraordinary child who had taught her so much about forgiveness and compassion. "Your grandfather taught me that it's never too late for forgiveness," she said, caressing the boy's hair, "and you taught me the power of innocence and true love." Michael smiled, feeling proud and loved. He knew, even at his young age, that he had done something important by saving his grandfather, by allowing that reconciliation before it was too late. "I think all 3 of us learned something, didn't we, Mom?" he philosophized with childlike wisdom. "Grandpa learned to ask for forgiveness, you learned to forgive, and I learned that family is more important than anything." The last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, ending a cycle and announcing new beginnings. Mary Claire and Michael remained there, embraced, united by the love and the legacy of healing they had built together. If the story of Mary Claire August, Michael moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere, the next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.